Well, thank you, first of all, to the organizers for having me here and letting me present my talk. And also great thanks to all the speakers that have been presenting their work beforehand. I was really amazed with everything that we encountered: philosophy, music, even artificial intelligence. Wow. Well, in my talk, I'll be staying closer to the subject of archaeology. I hope you don't mind it. I'll be talking about pottery. What can be more archaeological than that? But my focus will be rather on subdisciplines within archaeology and how different aspects of the past, of past lives and objects and texts, how they are being researched by archaeologists. I started out basically trying to research the relationships between objects, decorations, images, and text. But in the end, I actually ended up with more questions and more discussion points than I've started with, which I think is quite interesting, actually. And I will be trying to approach interdisciplinarity from different angles and basically test it out on my case study of inscribed stirrup jars. I'll first introduce you briefly to my text object. Probably not all of you here are Aegean prehistorians, so I don't know if maybe nobody has ever seen this shape. Well, this is a stirrup jar. It's called like that because it has a false neck, which is blocked, and it looks like a little stirrup, and the spout is actually on the side. Well, it is a very common object found in the Aegean, mostly in the late Bronze Age. The main function of it is containment and transportation of liquids. Well, they think mostly wine and oil. It hasn't been really proved by any residue analysis, but this is a very common shape as well, and this is quite always presumed that it's oil and wine. Well, as for the dating, it's mostly very popular in late Minoan and late Helladic periods. For people who don't know what it means at all, it's about 14 to 1200 BC. Although the shape has been thought to have been invented earlier on Crete in the Middle Minoan III, which is a couple of hundreds of years earlier. As for the distribution of this shape, it's very common on Crete and the Greek mainland. You can see on the map, the distribution map on to the left, are the normal stirrup jars, and on the right are the inscribed versions of this pottery, which will be the focus of my talk today. As you can see, it's quite a difference. It's quite different maps because, the stirrup jars without inscriptions are also very, very often found on Crete, while the inscribed ones, there are only 20% of those found on Crete, while the 80% are actually common on the mainland, and also. They're very common in palatial contexts and places where other linear B inscriptions have been found. I will be talking later about the linear B script, so don't be afraid if you don't know much about it. But in general, it's a script which is a precursor of ancient Greek language, which is quite hieroglyphic, and it is mostly used in administration, so recording different transactions on little tablets. As for the decoration, this is quite a big picture. I just wanted to show you the variety that exists. They have been the typology has been put up, and there are mainly 22 different groups which are present, which can be seen in the material record. Well, these are some of them. So you can see they're present both in light on dark and dark on light wares, And well, linear bends are very common, but also the octopus motif, which is quite popular in the late Bronze Age. It's also, as you can see, it's been used on the stirrup jars. Yeah, as for the inscribed stirrup jars, well, the inscriptions, well, you can see the inscriptions on some of them. For example, like on the third row to the right, there's one inscribed one. Yeah, those inscriptions have been put on the pots basically during the decoration, because you can see that they've been written before the firing of the vessel. So it's actually quite interesting. I'll be talking about that in a moment. Yeah, so they are not present on all the different types. Well, they're not like that. Certainly, certain decoration is consistent with certain inscriptions, so it's much more complicated than that. But first of all, I would like to start of why would somebody decorate a pot. I would like to, in my talk, I will first look at the decoration separately and then move on to the inscriptions and get more theoretical the further I go. So I'll also discuss the meaning of this object, which is basically the main goal of this research. Like how is meaning constituted within archaeology, and how do different levels of meaning interact with each other? In this case, the text and the object. And in the end, I'll also throw in some cognitive archaeology in here. I'm not sure if everybody is familiar with it, but I'll talk about this later as well. But so first of all, why would somebody decorate a pot? Well, I have borrowed some interpretations, some answers to this question presented by Daniel Brown in 1989. And he says that there are different conditions that constitute the meaning of decoration. First of all, it's the mechanical condition. So what is possible? The artist has to have possibilities, whether it's the shape or the material. So the certain decoration has to be possible. Secondly, there are cultural conditions. These involve social aspects, but also ideologies and symbolism. Warren de Boer also differentiates between two potential different decorations, which is pervasive and partitive. While pervasive, it's more influenced by the ideologies and the principles of a society, while partitive decoration is, more kind of free. And the third strategy mentioned by Brown is social contact strategies. So the decoration of a pot can have, it plays an active role in while being used. So a pot with a certain decoration can send a message to the user or to your guest, for example, about your social position or certain ideas that you as a person might have, or a certain identity. So in this way, it can also shape social behavior. Well, as for the inscriptions, I'll also introduce them quite briefly. So you see in the picture, you see an example from Eleusis, which is a very neat inscription, which cannot be said about all of them. On the stirrup jars, they are mostly found on the shoulder and the belly of the vessel. There has been several theories proposed why this place, why shoulder or belly. For example, Peter van Alphen suggests that the shoulder is very easily accessible by the scribe, so you can sit down and you can write it easily like this, and it's very handy. And on the other hand, it's also important from which perspective will this inscription be observed. So, for example, a shoulder inscription like this, it's very easy visible from the top, while the belly inscriptions on the belly can mostly be looked at horizontally. Well, as for the content of the inscriptions, well, there are different kinds of them. There are some longer ones and some shorter ones. Well, the most common formula consists of a personal name in the nominative, then a toponym, and then a personal name in the genitive. But in some cases, there's only one name present. So it's not very standardized as it is. Yeah, and what does this mean? What do these names and toponyms mean? Well, here I would like to have a look at the linear B tablets, well, which are quite small documents where well, economical transactions are being recorded. And I would like to quote. No, I don't want to quote yet. So there are some inscriptions on the tablets which mention sheep, and in those cases it's a very similar formula where you have the first name is of a shepherd who is responsible for a flock. Then you would have a certain location, well, where this flock can be found. And the second personal name would mean the owner or the collector of this flock of sheep. Well, they know that it's about sheep because there is often an ideogram present with a number, which is supposed to be the number of the sheep in the flock. Yes, and inscribed stirrup jars are of course a different kind of object than a tablet, first of all, because, well, the inscription is on the object itself, and yeah, there are no ideograms present on the vessel either. But it's been thought that this formula might represent a similar type of administration. So in the case that the first name would be somebody who is responsible for the production process, for example, and a toponym would mean the place of the manufacture of the vessel and probably the filling of the contents. And the third name might have been the name of the owner or the sender of the vessel. It's interesting that in the second personal name, it's some of the inscriptions mention wa or wanakate, which is linear B for wanax, so the king, and this leads us to an interpretation of also palatial control of this kind of transactions. I will be talking more about this royal participants later as well. Also, as for the style of the inscriptions, which is also quite an interesting subject, the medium is different. First of all, it's not a little tablet, it's a big jar, and instead of putting the inscriptions on with a stylus, the scribe uses a brush on the inscribed stirrup jars, which is interesting to see how the medium also influences the way the way the signs look and how they also change. So there are several types of signs which are differentiated. The one on the example is, as I said, is a very neat one. It's also very similar to the tablet forms, thus it's named the scribal type of signs. Although you see that, for example, some signs are quite rounded and the lines are very fluid, which is of course impossible if you inscribe a little piece of clay with sticks. There are also some unique signs which are encountered in different groups of inscribed stirrup jars. Furthermore, some signs are being reversed. It's been theorized that it might have been the effect of the lack of space. So if there is not enough space to write a sign correctly, it would be reversed to fit it in better. And there are also pseudo signs known from the record. They're only present on 12 stirrup jars, but still they are there. So these are signs that are not common in linear B script in general. And this can be accounted to either language evolution, so new signs are being created due to new mediums, for example, or the illiteracy of the painter has been argued for as well. But this is quite an interesting subject. Some things have been written on it, so I don't really have time to go further in it. So now I hope I've given enough introduction to the subject, and I would like to go more into the theoretical part of my talk. So, what is exactly text, and what is matter? Where does the decoration end, and where does exactly text begin? Well, from the first look, it seems quite obvious. Well, decoration is decoration, and text is text. But on the other hand, But if you think deeper about it, where is exactly the boundary? Because, well, decoration can also convey messages to the users, to the viewers. It is, well, in a way, a visual kind of text as well. While the inscriptions can also be viewed as from the aesthetic point of view. The signs are being painted very carefully and beautifully, so it's not only the message perhaps that counts. So this is one of the points that I'm actually really interested in. I would like to hear your thoughts about it in the discussion perhaps later. Well, when talking about linguistic signs, text, well, it's quite logical to look at the structuralists first of all. And well, for structuralists, text is text. There is nothing else is important. As de Saussure says, I would like to quote him, "The means by which the sign is produced is completely unimportant, for it does not affect the system, whether I make the letters in white or black, raised or engraved, with pen or chisel, all of this is of no importance with respect to the signification." Well, I think at this point it's quite an outdated view, and I completely do not agree with this, because I think that, well, in such an object as an inscribed vessel, everything has to do with each other, and everything is important also for as well as, for example, for receiving the message. So it's in practice, I think that it's quite impossible to see text purely as text. And I have another quote, which is, I think, a quite interesting example. The quote is by Lambros Malafouris, who's specializing in cognitive archaeology in the University of Oxford. And he says, well, you wouldn't write a formal letter on a post-it, would you? Very simply, under normal conditions, you do not send an official letter written on post-it. This is not, however, because such messages cannot actually be written on a post-it. It is rather because you know that using a small yellow piece of paper would probably have a negative effect on how your official message would be interpreted. So I think it's it's a very modern example of the interaction between actually the medium and the text. The medium itself influences the way somebody perceives the text, and in this way, I think text and other aspects are very entangled and have an interesting interaction going on there. Well, I have not much time left, so I'll just try to hurry. Another aspect of inscribed stirrup jars is their interpretation as a prestige object. Why why this aspect? I think it's an interesting illustration of how archaeology and, for example, linear B studies can aid each other. So there are some people who say that inscribed stirrup jars are prestige objects because they're quite limited in number. There are only 180 inscribed stirrup jars known and published, while there are thousands of normal stirrup jars known. Also, there is a mentioning of the wanax, as I already said, the king, which would also signify gift exchange. And here I would also like to mention the evidence from the tablets, where not really inscribed stirrup jars are mentioned in there, but there are different examples of where a certain gift exchange is being mentioned. Well, somebody sends 38 stirrup jars to another person as a royal gift, for example. And the last argument would be that there are also other shapes, especially fine ware. There are only 11 examples of these, which is very, very little amount. Although they are there, and if other shapes, more fine pottery is being inscribed as well, it would mean that it might have been a different meaning as well. Why would it not be an object of prestige? Because it's mostly found in administrative contexts. And for example, some people state that, it's very common to find prestige objects in graves, but there's only one inscribed stirrup jar found in a grave, so that's almost no evidence at all. As the last point, I would also like to have a look at the cognitive interpretation of this issue. For who is not really familiar with cognitive archaeology, it's quite a new branch in archaeology. I think it's been introduced by Colin Renfrew in the 1990s as the archaeology of mind, and now there have been a lot of studies which are focusing on different aspects, but what I'm really interested in is the cognitive interpretation of material culture. For example, Lambros Malafouris is developing the material engagement theory. It's been published recently, and in this theory, he's actually trying to find interpretations and explanations of how the human mind and the human body interact with the material culture in their environment. Because you'd never just think. You think through objects, you think about objects, you think with objects. And actually this theory proposes a point that brains, bodies, material objects, everything is actually entangled and intertwined. I would like to provide one very short example of how this theory can be used on my case study. Malafouris has been studying linear B for quite a while. There are a couple of publications about that, and one of the important aspects that he mentions is externalizing the cognitive function of memory into the outside world. To be very short, you don't want to remember everything because your mind gets fuller and fuller, and I think as modern people we know that better than anyone else with our smartphones, having calculators, everything, notes, everything is now on our smartphones. So basically we externalize everything that could have been in our head, we externalize it into an object. And in the past it's possible that this has been done as well, and inscriptions are one of such examples, because you don't want to remember the exact details of a certain transaction. That's why you put it on a tablet and you archive it. So in this way, you make things remember. The thing has become an extension of your memory, so you don't have to remember it yourself, so it can help you forget. So in a way, I think that is also applicable to the inscribed stirrup jars, because, if, for example, the information that is put in the inscription, if it's valuable for the production process or the transportation process, you can put it on the vessel, and then the people who are actually in the part of this process, they won't have to remember it and tell each other all the time what's going on. And on the other hand, a point that I thought of, I think it might also be interesting, is that when reading literature on this subject, most of the scholars, they tend to try to find one function of the inscribed stirrup term. But I think that the meaning is also changing, and in the case, for example, of the gift exchange, while at one point it might be a functional meaning, the inscription, for example, later in time, this meaning might also change, and I think it could also function, for example, as an emotional trigger as well, as a memory itself of a certain transaction. Of, for example, if it was a interesting and important gift exchange between two kings or something in that manner, it would stay as a memory of this exchange and a memory of a social contact, for example. So we're rounding up finally. So what are my conclusions? As I said, I have rather questions than conclusions, and I hope that this has been more food for thought for you and scholars in the future. So the points that I think that came out are: what are exactly the boundaries between text and matter, and between archaeology, which is supposed to be focusing on material culture, and, for example, classics, if to take another period, for example, the language studies. And how do these different disciplines also interact within archaeology, and how do they aid to gain more information about the past? And then the last point is maybe a very broad and abstract one, but what are the limits of interdisciplinarity? How far can you actually go, and what is the potential of cross disciplinary studies? Well, thank you very much for listening.